GamingBolt presents 15 games so good they don't need a difficulty setting. You run home on launch day of a brand new game, thrilled that the day has finally come. Pop that disc into your system and settle in for a nice long session. But before any of that, often you have a choice to make. What's your difficulty setting? While somewhat accepted today, the very idea of the player selecting their own difficulty is kind of strange, is it not? Before playing even a little bit of the game, you're asking the player to make a major decision that could impact their entire experience. The problems with difficulty modes are numerous, but there's a growing number of titles who have found creative ways around this, which we're here to discuss today. Make sure to share your favorites in the comment section below. Super Meat Boy. As an early indie hit, Super Meat Boy had to earn all of the praise it got to show that smaller teams could be worth just as much attention. Super Meat Boy had a lot of confidence in the mechanics surrounding the super tight platforming gameplay to not offer players a way to just cruise to the credits, losing the idea of lives and allowing the player to restart the small stages roughly 12 times per second until the proverbial brick wall was beaten down, allowing many players to find their groove and not even notice death. BLOODBORNE. The fast and furious cousin of Dark Souls, BLOODBORNE is the kind of game that will establish a rule set and stick to it. This consistency itself is a huge part of why such a punishing game even works, because each and every time you die, it feels like you could have done better, and you'll have to do just a little better next time if you want to keep your blood echoes. The gothic horror, Lovecraftian aesthetic, and speedy eye for an eye combat sure helps too. THUMPER. When most people hear rhythm game, they think about party titles like Guitar Hero, where one can live out their rockstar fantasies. THUMPER is more like after the concert. Your metal beetle screams along the track to the backing of a driving, thumping soundtrack, smashing through everything in its way. What makes THUMPER a rhythm game is how much that beautiful soundtrack helps tie the game together, as it will help guide your movements as you dare squeeze closer and closer to hitting turns perfectly using simple mechanics that would be beyond frustrating without the thought of music. Super Mario World. While Super Mario World might not be a particularly tough game if you grew up with it, the mysteries of Dinosaur Land can be rather perplexing to the first-time traveler. Go ahead and raise your hand if you needed help through the forest of illusion. But the thing that gets Super Mario World a spot on this list is the genius implementation of the Hidden Switch Palace levels. By activating the blocks with the 4 hidden levels, players modulate the difficulty of the game by adding power-ups and platforms where none exist otherwise, and in such a natural and cohesive way that it could have only come from Nintendo at their peak. BRAID. Jonathan Blow's initial outing in BRAID is rather deceptive at first, seeming to present a simple story about a Mario-like saving a princess. While there's an atomic bomb's worth of backstory behind the beginning premise, should you really be unable to unwrap each and every puzzle in the game to unlock the mind-blowing true ending. BRAID manages to do enough to still engage and give a satisfying story to those players too. Sometimes difficulty isn't just about completing, it's about giving players a satisfying point where they can say, I'm okay with being done. Sonic Mania. A classic revival through and through, Sonic Mania continues a long-standing tradition of having intricately designed levels that, given enough time and understanding, any level of player can finish or master. The myth that Sonic is all about letting the player go fast was perpetuated by the terrible 3D games, but Sonic Mania makes the player earn that speed through mastery. Even if you aren't there though, that's okay. In true fashion with the classics that inspired it, Sonic will usually take a dive to a slower route instead of just down a pit. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. We would like to briefly acknowledge that while Master Mode eventually launched for The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, the status as DLC and the fact that it's really more of a full remix and rebalance of the game makes it a bit iffy. When just considering the base game, Breath of the Wild bravely trades in linear story and item progression, but still somehow manages to come up with a rather well-balanced power curve throughout the whole game. From the first stick you pick up, to each divine beast that you free, to felling the Dark Beast Ganon himself, Breath of the Wild makes you feel more powerful with each and every action you take. Crash n.sane Trilogy. When bringing the manic marsupial up to speed on current generation of consoles, Vicarious Visions did a lot more under the hood to make him palatable, just in case anyone made any ridiculous difficulty comparisons to an action RPG. While some changes were contentious, there's no denying that alterations like the consistent physics, a proper save system for the first Crash game, and the game's low-key granting additional checkpoints if you struggle made the sometimes obtuse games a lot easier to binge. Grand Theft Auto V. Rockstar rose the Grand Theft Auto series to such a meteoric star among gaming IP that a release is something of a community touchstone that brings the console wars to a ceasefire and a brief moment of world peace. And a lot of that comes from the incredible amount of attention the developers put into the series. Grand Theft Auto V in particular remains an incredibly popular game because of the difficulty balancing was just in the right spot to make it feel gripping, but not too high as to reawaken flashbacks of infamous train missions. Any other difficulty mode would have just cheapened the entire experience. Metal Gear Solid V: The Phantom Pain. Whereas many of the games before it had the standard difficulty select from Liquid Easy to Big Boss European Extreme, Metal Gear Solid V eschews that kind of thing entirely for the benefit of the game at large. Instead of making such a decision before you even play, in-universe options and features modulate the difficulty as you go. Are you surrounded? Call in some air support. If you die several times, you'll have the chicken hat come out to help you keep your stealth. On the other end, guards will take countermeasures against your favorite tactics such as helmets against tranq bullets and night vision goggles. It's these systems that keep Metal Gear Solid V as emergent as it is, and something that didn't need a difficulty option to begin with. Ollie Ollie 2. Taking the classic Tony Hawk's Pro Skater series and giving it a 2D endless runner spin, Ollie Ollie 2 has no need for difficulty levels for much of the same reason that Super Meat Boy doesn't, in that the game can restart so quickly that a bail never becomes frustrating. The fast-paced action, level goals that can range from practically painless to downright cruel to give players all manner of chances to move on, and the hilarious ragdoll physics help keep the pain away as well. Super Metroid. The journey to recover the last Metroid puts a lot of trust into the player to stick with it, but the level design itself holds the game up as well. Silently guiding the player through the caves of Zebes was no easy feat, and might have been cheapened significantly with another mode telling the player where to go and how to fight the boss monsters. But excellent signposting, blocking off backtracking, and a generous health pool all keep Super Metroid in that perfect difficulty spot. Pokemon series. Much like Super Mario World before it, the Pokemon series manages to remain accessible to a wide audience while also having depth just beneath the surface for those who would challenge themselves. One of the central tenets of the Pokemon series is the choice between a fire, water, or grass starter Pokemon. In addition to helping establish the importance of types in the series, this choice also functions as a difficulty select, with many titles having drastically different early games depending on which starter Pokemon you choose. Souls series. Dark Souls might have become the hackney shorthand for difficulty in the gaming space, but that's a rather reductive viewpoint of Dark Souls in general. Dark Souls is absolutely punishing if you don't pay attention, but it never takes the easy route of making it cheap. Much like some of the other titles on this list, in-world mechanics such as magic can help modulate the difficulty and ease players in as well. Would Dark Souls be that hit if it wasn't without Get Good? Probably not. Hollow Knight. With the aesthetic sense and gameplay sensibilities of Dark Souls, with the pitch-perfect control of a Nintendo game, Hollow Knight isn't doing anything terribly unique on its own. But when you execute to the level that Team Cherry does, you don't need to. Handing off things like labeling points of interest on your map keeps the player involved in the world, and the combat sits in exactly the right difficulty spot to keep the fighting exciting without becoming too routine and easy. Any input on the difficulty of the player's behalf, such as making it easier or harder, would have upset the balance achieved by the fine folks at Team Cherry. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.